The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. This is Liz Comiskey with the Farmers Market Coalition, and today's webinar is on pricing comparisons at farmers markets, understanding value and affordability. And I would like to introduce Nikki Yu from the Food Trust. Hi, everyone. And Nikki, you're going to be the moderator for today.
That's right, Liz. I'm so pleased to be here today.
And Nikki, maybe speak up just a little bit. You sound a little quiet.
Okay, no problem. And let me know when to do my presentation. Hi, everyone. My name is Nikki Uy, and I work at the Food Trust here in Philadelphia, and I oversee the Food Trust Farmers Market Program. I'm pleased to be participating and moderating the Farmers Market Coalition's webinar on price comparisons at farmers markets, understanding value and affordability. We're very lucky today to have Anthony Flaccavento from Rural Scale Inc. with us, who will be discussing his recent study on price comparisons between farmers markets and grocery stores. He will also be discussing how this data can be used to reinforce farmers markets' commitment to equity and affordability. While it's particularly relevant during these times when consumers are more price conscious, comparing the price of products at farmers markets versus other forms of retail has long been the subject of discussion, and it's great to have a study like Anthony's examine that. So first I'm going to do a short introduction about the Food Trust and our Farmers Market Program, how we and our farmers communicate value to our customers, and I'll also be talking about how we address the issue of affordability when operating farmers markets in low to mixed income communities. And after
Nikki,
that, we'll present a study and findings. Yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think that you have to press that button for sharing your screen.
Okay, got it.
There you go.
Okay.
Thanks.
No problem. Okay, so there's my presentation queued. I'll be doing a short introduction about the Food Trust, and then we'll move on to Anthony's presentation. If we can clarify anything for you while either of us is presenting, please send the questions along, and we'll do our best to answer and clarify as we present. And we'll be holding more general questions for after the presentation. So why farmers markets, and who is the Food Trust? The Food Trust strives to make healthy food available to all. Working with neighborhoods, schools, grocers, farmers, and policymakers, we've developed a comprehensive approach that combines nutrition education and greater availability of affordable and healthy food. The Farmers Market Program was one of the Food Trust's first initiatives when it was founded 20 years ago. Too many neighborhoods in Philadelphia lack access to nutritious and local foods, and the area's farmers and artisan food producers are in search of an outlet for their products. So we find that farmers markets make these connections between urban and rural, all while becoming hubs in the communities that they operate in. This gives you a snapshot of the Food Trust Farmers Market Program. That's a schedule of our 2011 markets. At present, we operate 26 farmers markets in the city of Philadelphia, and we have about 7 affiliate markets in southeastern Pennsylvania, which we help to start or provide some technical assistance for. Because the Food Trust's mission is to increase access to healthy food, most of our farmers markets have strategically been located in low-income neighborhoods that have little or no critical access to fresh food. Today, 88% of our markets are located in areas of need. And the Food Trust has always been in the business of communicating the value of shopping at a farmers market to its consumers, no matter what their background. And our network of markets and shoppers continue to grow, and our customers value many things about shopping at our farmers markets that we're going to discuss. So this past year, we served over 400 customers at our Philadelphia market. One of the things that we hear from our customers is that they really value being able to use all kinds of various forms of payment at the farmers markets. At our markets, we accept EBT, sometimes called food stamps, farmers market nutrition program coupons given to low-income mothers and seniors, and Philly Food Bucks. Philly Food Bucks are a partnership between the Food Trust and the Philadelphia Department of Public Health, and were launched in 2010 to increase EBT usage and to make fresh food more available to Philadelphians at farmers markets. For every $5 spent on EBT cards, customers can get a free $2 coupon for whole fruits and vegetables. Distribution and promotion of the food box are through farmers markets, health centers, county assistance offices, churches, and other community groups. So these are some of the ways that we here at the Food Trust address affordability at our farmers markets. We also find that many of our customers value having the choice to spend their benefits at the farmers markets because the products are fresh, high quality, and tend to last a long time. Our food stamp sales have really grown a lot in the past couple of years. They almost doubled from 2009 to 2010 and over doubled from 2010 to 2011. So overall, our EBT and EBT SNAP sales at farmers markets have increased by about 300% over the past 2 seasons. We did survey a set of customers at 4 farmers markets in 2010, and these markets were all located in communities of high need. And we found some interesting results. 87% of the customers felt that prices at farmers markets were about the same or less expensive compared to food stores in their neighborhood. Among SNAP and food stamp customers, that number was 70%. 70% reported that prices are less expensive. This could also have to do with the choices of stores in these neighborhoods. 52% of shoppers participated in either SNAP, WIC, or the FMNT program at some point during the year. And 72% of the shoppers reported eating a greater variety of fruits and vegetables since coming to market. So we've talked about how most of our customers feel that prices for fresh fruits and vegetables at market are affordable. They also value that they can use their benefits at the farmers markets. And there are many other things that our customers value at the markets. First of all, they really like knowing who's growing their food. Our customers like being able to talk to the farmer about the food and how it was grown and who grew it. There's an accountability at a farmer's market that's lacking in a lot of other food stores. Farmers can answer detailed questions about the food that customers will be feeding to their families. If that's not valuable in today's day and age of food scares, I don't know what is. I think last year there was a stat that came out that news stories about food scares outnumbered news stories about food prices. So I think people really value being able to talk to someone who can answer proper questions about their food. They also enjoy that farmers markets can become a community hub and a place to meet old and new neighbors. In a lot of areas, our farmers markets are safe and clean places to shop. Safety can be an overall issue in some of the places that we operate our markets. Besides the obvious ways, unsafe environments can deter residents from living healthy lifestyles. It can be difficult to go out for exercise or to buy healthy food if you don't feel safe walking in your neighborhood. So we've opened several farmers markets in parks and other areas previously considered unsafe. And we find that a well-run farmers market can provide residents with a safe place to shop, a hub for neighbors to gather and socialize, and eventually change the perception of a place. A farmers market can also be a marketplace to incubate local food producers. Farmers markets have been known to launch businesses and products developed in the community, can now be found in with major retailers, or sometimes we find that some of the products that were incubated at markets eventually become brick-and-mortar retailers themselves. So working with the community, food entrepreneurs can also be a way to introduce cultural elements to markets. For instance, a way to reflect the diversity in the community could be to recruit a prepared food producer or a baker who specializes in products to cater to the local minority community. That's a great way to diversify an audience, or even hiring market helpers from the community can go a long way in terms of contributing perhaps jobs to the community and increasing the diversity of the folks who are serving the market. Market managers are also considered to be a resource at our farmers markets, and something that folks tend to value. 58% of our shoppers receive nutrition education at the market this year through food samples, recipes, and brochures, and one-on-one conversations about healthy eating. Residents seem to be really interested in the information and are always looking for new recipes at the market manager table. And a good market manager can really facilitate conversations among the customers themselves, and also between the customers and farmers about how to cook the produce, healthier lifestyles, in addition to all the market manager duties that we know about, like setting up, breaking down, and operating the EBT machine. So generally speaking, we feel that we're a positive presence in the communities where our farmers markets are located, and we find that our customers and our community partners seem to appreciate that. This is my last slide. I wanted to end my part of the webinar with the Hunting Park Farmers Market. There's a picture of that of it right there, because I feel that it's a community that really values a lot of things that we've touched The Hunting Park Farmers Market, which is located here in Philadelphia, is located in an 87-acre park that was known for violence, drug use, and other kinds of illegal commerce until recently. As part of the park revitalization effort to promote healthy eating and active living, the farmers market was opened in conjunction with other improvements to the park. So we opened this market in 2011, and there's our farmer, Emmanuel. The farmer had a phenomenal season at market. On the very first day, many people from the community came to market and brought their neighbors with them. We had many $20 to $40 EBT transactions in the first day, which indicated that folks were buying groceries and valued being able to spend their benefits on high-quality produce. In addition, the farmers market really helped transform the park into a more well-used public space. It was a weekly event that residents could count on at the park that was safe and family-friendly. The Hunting Park Farmers Market developed a core of regular shoppers, and it was common to find local leaders and politicians shopping and mingling with the residents. So that was quite a change for the park. The community definitely has adopted the farmers market and really even the farmer as their own. The Hunting Park Market is their market. The farmer feels a part of their community, and they obviously appreciate each other, and the market's presence has enhanced the park's reputation. And we really find that the community has adopted the market and really appreciates the farmer being there and really values it. The farmer gets a huge applause from everyone present every time he attends a community meeting, which happens once a month. So I feel like they really get it. And that's the end of the presentation for me. Now we're going to move on to Anthony's presentation, which will be taking a look at affordability of farmers markets in the Southeast and Appalachia region. Anthony Flaccavento is an organic farmer near Abington, Virginia, and has been working on community environmental and economic development in Central Appalachia for the past 25 years. In 1995, he founded Appalachian Sustainable Development, and in 2009, Anthony founded Scale, Inc., a private consulting business dedicated to catalyzing and supporting ecologically healthy regional economies and food systems. Scale works with community leaders, farmers, foundations, economic development agencies, and others in Appalachia, Iowa, Wisconsin, Michigan, and other communities. He has written and spoken about sustainable development, ecology, and economics, food systems, and Appalachian issues extensively. If we can clarify anything for you while Anthony's presenting, please send the questions along and we'll forward it to Anthony, and he'll do his best to answer as he's presenting. We'll be holding more general questions for after the presentation. Okay, Anthony, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okie dokie. I am attempting to get my screen to show. Hello, everyone. Nikki or Elizabeth, I don't know if you can help me. I've got my show my screen on, but I'm not getting the screen up.
Hello, Liz.
Hi. Let me see. Okay, try now, Anthony. We can see your screen. I think you just need to pull up your PowerPoint.
Okay. Great.
There you go.
Wonderful.
Burn.
Thanks. So I welcome everybody again. I'm going to talk primarily about a study that I did, but I'm going to give a little context first that builds really on very much the same things that that Nikki had said. Some context, obviously, we know that farmers markets have been growing in our state of Virginia. A lot of folks know that growth nationally has been tremendous, from well under 2,000 to over 7,000 this past year. And when thinking about why farmers markets have grown so much, what we usually talk about are the many benefits to both farmers and sort of a certain subset of consumers. And this graph, which traces how our food dollars are spent and who they go to, shows the middle section of the graph, the red portion portion is the percentage of our food dollars that goes to the farmer. And what you can see is that from the beginning of the last century to nearly the end, the amount of our food dollars grew a great deal, but the amount going to farmers hardly nudged a bit. So the reality that it's so hard to make a living has driven more and more people to consider farmers markets and other direct-to-consumer ways of basically getting a higher percentage of the food dollar. And as Nikki said, farmers markets do make great incubators. We've seen them in our own community, businesses that started there, food businesses and farm businesses that perhaps have graduated to their own site while still maintaining a presence. And this study from Cornell shows that farmers markets, in fact, nationally are a terrific incubator, with the vast majority of farmers doing basically $1,000 or less in capitalization to get their enterprise going. So it's terrific for farmers. And it's terrific for new farmers, like this young man, Matt Sanders, who worked a little on our farm and then went off on his own and now sells at the farmers market. And it's great for old-timers, like my friend Charlie Foster and Calvin Matney in the background, that have been farming for their whole lives and really have sort of reinvigorated farming in large part because of farmers markets. And for consumers, of course, there's a bunch of reasons why people choose farmers markets. Some is the ambiance, that there's a lot of people who still shop at big boxes, but there's a whole lot of people who don't like the quality there, or don't like the ethics there, and certainly don't like the aesthetic or the ambiance, and prefer a market, whether it's a small town market like Abingdon's or a larger city market like Philadelphia. There's just more and more folks who are making that choice for a lot of reasons. And in making that choice, it also seems clear that it's bringing people back downtown, people particularly, I think, in areas of a lot of urban sprawl who've gotten used to doing virtually all of their shopping without ever going into the town center. This study from Project for Public Spaces demonstrated that this is a national survey, over 800 people, and they found that nearly two-thirds of those customers, 60%, said they really only came to town on the market days. And of those folks who did come to town for market, about two-thirds of them said that they routinely visited other stores and shops while in town. So the farmers markets, and people are recognizing this in economic development circles as well. They're, on top of everything else, they're kind of becoming an economic engine in many communities. And of course, there's the health issue. This graph shows how we've essentially traded low healthcare costs in the 1960s and, relatively speaking, higher food costs as a percentage of household income. And we've just traded those two, where now we pay a very high percentage of our income on healthcare and, of course, a declining amount on food. And people, not only farmers, are raising questions about that, but consumers are starting to put more value on food. As Nikki said, EBT has grown all around the country, well over 1,000 farmers markets that have it now. In our area, there was no access to SNAP benefits. We did have the Senior Farmers Market Nutrition Program for a number of years, which was a big success. But it was only 3 years ago that Abingdon introduced the SNAP program and the wireless device, and it's also doubled in each of the 3 years, interestingly enough, in participation. And additionally, it's spread to about 11 markets in the region, small town markets. The question of whether this local eating equates to health is difficult just because there's so many factors that go into the health, but it does seem pretty clear that, again, just as Nikki's survey demonstrated that a lot of people said they were eating more fruits and vegetables, that same kind of response is turning up in other places, like a study done at the New Orleans Farmers Market, and then studies by Gus Schumacher and another individual show that people who are coming initially because of an incentive, because of a double coupon type incentive that brings them to market, a pretty high percentage of them are coming back even when those double vouchers are gone, and it's beginning to change shopping habits. So that's great news for all of us. And of course, there's a lot to have at farmers markets. There's a rich diversity of products, fresh whole grain breads, grass-finished meats, canned and preserved foods of all types, flours, and of course taste. A lot of people go to farmers market first and foremost for the wonderful flavors they can get there that are usually pretty superior to what they can get in other places. And then there's the question of community and civic engagement, which is in our particular town of Abingdon, and we're seeing it all over the country. Again, Nikki alluded to it in hers as well, that people, it's really revitalizing community spaces, whether it's in a small Appalachian town or a neighborhood of a big northeastern city. It's really quite an exciting thing to see. But my study ignored all that. It sort of acknowledged that, yep, farmers markets are great. Every one of those things seems to be true and quite valuable, with really tangible impacts, positive impacts. But still, I wanted to reduce it to a much simpler question, acknowledging that all of these wonderful attributes are there. I still wanted to see, can ordinary folks really shop at these markets? And so I undertook this study. It was a small-scale study done with very limited resources. It was done in 2 months, late last summer. And the study put the question out there on price alone, are farmers markets affordable for people on a budget, sort of ordinary working folks, in comparison to their other options, which in our area are generally kind of mainline supermarkets. And so I wanted to look closely not just at the group of people that clearly were welcoming and supporting the farmers markets all over our region and around the country, but I wanted to look at folks who were not typical farmers market shoppers perhaps a few years ago, but seem to now be coming to the market, kind of more elderly people, people on fixed incomes, working families, young moms, that group there. And to kill the suspense, the basic conclusion, I have more detailed and nuanced conclusions later on, but the basic conclusion is that the answer is yes. On price alone, the vast majority of farmers markets that I looked at in the Southeast and Appalachia are at or below the price of mainstream farmers markets. And I'm going to discuss what I mean when I say when considering a mix of everyday foods. But I looked at this batch of foods that we'll talk about, and overwhelmingly, this was true. So it was quite, I didn't know what the results would be, but these were the results I suspected, and it's the way it turned out. And for everyday foods, you know, who defines that? But in our neck of the woods, it was defined one way, and it would probably be defined differently in some other place with different ethnicities. Green beans and tomatoes and apples and lettuce and things like that. And so we looked at those kinds of foods, and we didn't look at some of the foods that are probably best known, kind of the famous farmers market foods, like heirloom tomatoes. I sell the heck out of heirloom tomatoes myself and to all kinds of folks. But again, I wanted to stay away from the things that were a little more exotic, a little more maybe of a luxury item or a pricey item, and just look more at the standard foods. So we stayed away from examining the price comparison of these types of foods. I'm going to talk a little bit about the methodology. I tried to come up with a methodology that, first of all, we could implement. So that meant it had to be pretty straightforward. I should say that I hired a wonderful young research assistant who gathered the bulk of the data in most of these communities. I did some of it myself, and then I also had a handful of volunteers in other communities like Lexington, Kentucky, and Richmond, Virginia, who were willing to follow the same protocol. We all did the same thing. We had the same written protocol to follow in trying to gather the same kind of data so the analysis would be consistent. It was 24 farmers markets. I was shooting for 24 or more, and I got 24 in 19 different communities. So a few of the markets had, few of the communities had 2 or 3 markets. For the most part, it was one farmers market per community. And then this data was taken from 6 states: Virginia, Tennessee, North and South Carolina, and West Virginia and Kentucky. And I should say not evenly either. In fact, in Kentucky, we only got data from a single market in Lexington, Kentucky. It was sort of dictated not by choice, but by time and resources. We got more data from North and South Carolina and Virginia and Tennessee, and less from Kentucky and West Virginia. But still, it did encompass all 6 states. We tried also to look at different size towns and to see if there were differences in the trends. And so a number of the towns were in what I would call a small town bracket, 15,000 or less, like Jonesboro, Tennessee, and Abingdon, well below that, below 10,000. We looked at small cities. At least in our part of the world, we would consider 50 to 95,000, like Charleston, West Virginia, and Asheville, North Carolina, to fall in the small city category. And then we looked at what, for our region, would be the larger towns, for the most part, excluding cities like Atlanta. Lexington, Kentucky, with almost 500,000 people, and Richmond, Virginia, with almost 200,000 people. So we had a nice mix from the very small town rural market up to a city market. And then the markets themselves were quite variable, from simple open air, handful of vendor type markets to small town markets like Abingdon's. It's still not a whole lot of people, a town of 8,000, but a very robust town and market, up to more fully established markets like the 17th Street market's one of Richmond, Virginia's market, and then the largest one of all in Lexington, Kentucky, where they essentially block off 2 blocks in downtown Lexington. Now for the supermarkets, we, for the most part, use what I'm calling mainstream supermarkets, and we did this 100% of the time for conventional produce. But the vast majority of the comparison points, so we go to a farmer's market and gather data, gather information, and then we would go to a couple of supermarkets in close proximity. And Kroger and Food Lion were the 2 national chains that we used. Now, Food Lion is really almost a discount grocer. And then we also gathered data from 2 regionally based chains, privately owned, family-run companies, Food City and Ingalls. All of them, with Food Lion being the most discount of those, but all of them I would put in the kind of mainstream supermarket where, again, most ordinary folks shop in this part of the world. We did occasionally look at Whole Foods. Most of our communities do not have Whole Foods, but in a couple of places there were a Whole Foods. And then there's a small regional chain called Earth Fare that is sort of like a local version of Whole Foods. So they were included in the study, but for the most part, it was the mainstream markets that was the point of comparison. That's a Food City in Bristol, Virginia. That's an Ingalls in Western North Carolina. So you can see nothing real fancy, but good-sized, full service grocery stores. Now, what did we compare? The everyday foods that I refer to, again, that's obviously a judgment call, but it was everyday foods for most folks in this part of the world. You can see the list there of potatoes and beans and peppers, green beans, cantaloupes, eggplant. It was also driven by what was available that time of year. And of course that shifts from one time of year to another. But a good mix of things, summer crops and fall crops, to some of the data was taken in the early fall. And on the protein side, a lot of farmers market price studies I'm finding out don't include proteins, don't include meats and eggs. And I can see why, because as you'll learn, it was more difficult to make comparable comparisons. But I did want to include them because, again, my impetus for this, what I was trying to really ascertain was, can regular folks, can ordinary folks shop at these markets and get much of what they need at these markets and find it to be affordable? So since we're mostly a meat-eating society, and certainly this region, I thought it'd be important to do my best to gather that data. And again, I stayed with the more economical cuts of meats and kind of the basics. I didn't look at ribeye or a pork tenderloin or things like that as ground beef and that sort of thing. The comparison I did, and you'll hear some of the other studies are different in this regard, was not an item-by-item comparison, but rather a look at sort of a basket's worth, kind of a week's worth of a selection of items. So I was not attempting to find out whether zucchini was more or less expensive or potatoes were more or less expensive. Instead, I took the sum of all of the items that fit into that category of everyday foods, both the produce and the meat and eggs. And it was not the same for every market. It just varied by availability, size of market. It was always the same between the local market and the local supermarket, but it was not the same across markets. But it was all in that range of foods. And so again, I didn't do an item by item, but rather kind of tallied it all up to see in total how much money are folks spending. I used the median price rather than the mean or average, so that like in that list I have posted, 5 prices on a particular item, you go for the midpoint. The reason for that is that in a small sampling, the average price can be either at distorted high or low, depending on whether one price is kind of out of the ballpark with the norm. And so I chose the median price because that's generally considered to be a better representation of really of the norm. So the median price was used, same procedure for both the farmers markets and the supermarkets. Wherever there was a significant offering of organic, and some markets had none, and some markets had a lot, but wherever there was a significant offering of organic, I then did a separate tally on the prices of organic produce. With supermarkets, again, it was the same basic procedure. I attempted to find comparable items. I went to 2 supermarkets. I did not include special discounts. You know how these days supermarkets seem to be constantly running discounts on certain things, or a price discount if you use a special value card. Because I did not include any special discounts at farmers markets, I didn't at supermarkets either. And so the process was, once I had gathered the information, or my colleagues had gathered the information at the local farmers market, they then took that list and tried to find the same items at the supermarket. They did that at 2 different supermarkets, and then I took the data and totaled the supermarket totals and chose the lower overall supermarket price. So just to be clear, it might be that in supermarket 1, the tomatoes were 25 cents a pound cheaper than in supermarket 2, but if the total price of all the items measured was less in supermarket 2, that's the one I took. And my rationale for that was, first of all, again, I was trying to do everything I could to not bias this in favor of the farmers market, so I chose the cheapest one overall. But I also believe that most people who shop these days do not bounce back and forth between multiple supermarkets in order to save a nickel or a dime or a quarter here and there. I know some folks do, but I think most people kind of have their favorite place to shop, and so once there, they might pay a little more for one item and less for others. So I used a single supermarket comparison there. So even though we were gathering prices for 2, we were choosing the least expensive overall. Now, comparability had several characteristics. Besides the same item, I was trying to compare quality. So myself, when I went out, and the folks that were gathering for me, I instructed them not to include produce at the farmer's market that was crappy, that was poor quality. I didn't want, whatever the other benefits of the produce might have been, local and organic, I did not want to include a shriveled cucumber from the farmer's market and compare it with a pretty one at the supermarket, or a baseball bat-sized zucchini with a much smaller, kind of more elegant one at the supermarket. So we first of all tried to have comparable quality. Sometimes things at the market were by count or volume, like cucumbers 2 for $1 type thing, or things by the quart or pint, and then you go to the supermarket and they would be by weight. And so what we did was, when it was a volume measurement in one place and a weight measurement in the other, was to get a weight, an average weight on the volume, so that we were, again, measuring the same quantity. And then in terms of quality, I've already mentioned that I looked at organic separately And in the same way, we tried, and you'll hear more about this, to look at free-range eggs, which was not difficult. Every supermarket pretty much did have some, at least allegedly free-range egg available. It was in the grass-finished or pasture-based meats that it was more difficult, but that was the effort in terms of comparing apples to apples. I should say, too, that at farmers markets, the vast majority of the vendors whom we considered to be organic were self-certified. There were a few certified organic, and a larger number that were certified naturally grown, which I consider to be a reasonably reliable certification process. Most of them, however, were self-identified. That's because very, very few organic farmers whom I know to be organic actually certify for farmers markets. So we did essentially cut a little leeway there for the organic producers at farmers markets, but I think they were truly organic. And again, we did not consider many of the other qualities, the taste, freshness, health, food miles, etc., nor did we in any way factor in the benefits available, the senior coupons, the WIC or EBT benefits, or any of the matching dollars. And some studies have. I'll talk a little more in a moment about a study done by Portland State and the Portland Community Reinvestment Fund. Very interesting study that I just saw the summary of was shared with me. I think it's still unpublished at this point, but they did factor in. They looked at farmers markets and compared them to tiers of supermarkets, and then at one point in the study also factored in the impacts of the matching dollar programs as part of their analysis. I did not do that. So then mine was just a straight up and down price comparison. So here are the conclusions. In 74% of the communities, farmers market produce, conventional produce, which is what most people buy in this part of the world, was less expensive than supermarket produce, on average by 22%. When we looked at organic produce, and we were only able to do that for a subset of the markets, but a reasonably large number of them, the difference was even more striking. They were less expensive. Organic produce was less expensive overall at the farmers markets 88% of the time. So almost 9 out of 10 times organic produce was cheap. And I believe by about an average of about 12 to 15%. Meats were a different story. Meats were more expensive, and again, keep in mind we had a lot of apples to orange challenges here, but as a group, meats were always more expensive at farmers markets than at supermarkets. Now, to break that out a little bit, if you were comparing grass-finished, free-range, pasture-based, however you want to call it, meats at farmers markets with conventional meats at supermarkets, then those meats were about 47%, so almost half again as much. To the degree that I was able, when I was able to compare local grass-finished meats at the farmers market with the same sort of item at the supermarket, the difference was pretty marginal, about 10% more. The problem was that in our region, more often than not, supermarkets did not have grass-finished or free-range meats available to compare. So if you're an average consumer and you're going to the farmer's market, the reality is that most farmer's market meats, at least in our experience, are being grass-based, free-range, which is a wonderful thing, but that's the only meat available to shoppers. So I did want to have both levels of comparison there. Interestingly, I call this the chicken effect. When we actually broke out the meats, the cost of ground beef, this again now we're talking grass-finished ground beef to conventional ground beef in the supermarket, or sausage patties, sausage links, beef roasts, things like bratwurst, all of those kind of grass pasture-based. They were actually very close in price to their conventionally raised counterparts at supermarkets. The difference was quite small. It was whole chickens was the thing that really inflated the price of meat overall. And I'm not saying this in any way to say that those whole chickens are expensive, because that's the only kind of chicken we buy. We think it's well worth it and very economical when you cook the chicken well. But The fact of the matter was that they were typically $4 to $4.50 a pound at the farmer's market, compared to about $1 to $1.50 a pound at the supermarket. So a 4-pound chicken at the farmer's market was going to be $16 to $18, compared to $5 to $6 for a whole chicken at the supermarket. Again, grass-free range versus conventionally raised, but still a huge difference. If it had not been for chickens, if I had not included chickens, the analysis on the meats would have been they would have been much, much closer to supermarket conventional prices. So again, another conclusion, and probably I think this is the last overall conclusion, is that including produce, meats, and eggs, everything, farmers markets were the same price or less than supermarkets 74% of the time for comparable items. Again, either everything conventional or a mix of conventional and organic / grass-based in both locations. The same price or less, basically 3/4 of the time on average, by about 12% less. If I instead compared the lowest cost items, putting aside organic and free range and all that, but just compared the lowest cost items, the cheapest stuff at the supermarket with the cheapest stuff at the farmer's market, then the fact that the meat items were more expensive meant that farmers markets were more expensive, not by much, 52% of the time. So at that point, going on the, not comparability, but cheapest available item, it was about 50-50. This is similar in other places. Study in Vermont did an item-by-item comparison, a little different from mine, supported by the Northeast Organic Farming Association. You can see there about 1/3 of the items were cheaper at farmers markets. Another 6 out of 12 were just a little bit higher. So again, a lot of comparability there with organic produce, as in our case, considerably less. Similar results from a study done by the Leopold Center of a handful of markets in Iowa, and a study in Seattle, which I believe looked at just a single market. And then back to the Portland study, again, they did a little different take on this, very interesting. They broke supermarkets into discount, mainstream, and high-end. So I had sort of 2 categories of supermarkets. They broke it down into 3. And when they compared them then, about half the time, almost half, 6 to 13 times farmers markets had comparable prices to either the Tier 1 or the Tier 2, the discount or the mainstream. When they figured in $5 of matching benefits from SNAP, then the farmers markets were comparable or cheaper more than half the time. So I'll close with this. I think the other thing that would be very interesting, first of all, I would love it and would encourage it if other people would undertake these studies. Very encouraging the results of the consumer response that Nikki mentioned, but it would be great to have some hard data from some large urban centers in the Northeast and in the Southwest. I think it'd be terrific to have this type of study, and I'd be happy to share my protocol with anybody who wants it, and then they can adapt it to their own needs. And I think another question we who organized this panel were talking about that's very interesting is there's been a lot of attention given to the fact that there's sort of a foodie culture that supports farmers markets, and that's been, I think, inflated, overblown, but it is there. And also of late, finally, we've given a good bit of attention to trying to help lower-income people utilizing SNAP or WIC or other types of subsidies get to farmers markets, and that's a wonderful thing as well that I fully support. But I think there's this big group in the middle, folks who are neither on some type of public benefit, nor are they kind of generally well off and generally into the food culture. They're that big group of kind of working folks and lower middle class people who are ordinary in their food tastes and their shopping habits. And it would be very interesting to do some analysis of their shopping habits and how they perceive affordability at farmers markets. So I will stop there, and I think we have about 17, 18 minutes for questions.
Yeah, Anthony, we have a couple of questions here, one from Linda and one from Tracy, and they wanted to know whether you'd listed all the retailers that you had gotten your prices from. And they were wondering if you had ever considered doing a pricing study for, say, Walmart or Sam's Club and those other kinds of big retail discounters. Or if
I considered it, but although Walmart has an enormous presence in our region, It's also a bit spottier than Food Lion and Kroger, which are the two main ones in the region. So just kind of, again, trying to have some relative consistency from one state to another and one community to another. The two local chains, Ingles and Food City, in their communities are quite prominent and gather the kind of lion's share of consumers. And then I would say where they're not available in the communities that didn't have an Ingles or Food City, then either Kroger or Food Lion tend to be the main chains. And that's speculation. I really don't know how the demographics break out. It would certainly be worth it to do a study comparing it to Walmart or Sam's Club, but my intent was simply to not use Whole Foods and Whole Foods-like stores as the point of comparison, because I thought that would have been unfairly biasing it in favor of the farmers markets in terms of pricing. So by hitting that range of Food Lion, Kroger, and the regionally based chains, I think I caught the places where the vast majority of consumers shop if they're not shopping at a farmer's market.
So it just seemed more appropriate for the region that you were studying. But I agree with you that it would also be great to do a comparison study in areas where the alternative to farmers markets are superstores like Sam's Club and Walmart.
Yeah, yeah.
So the other question that we have was from the beginning. It was from Tracy about the first chart. She wanted to know what the units on the x-axis of the graph are near the beginning of your presentation.
Oh, the food dollar?
I think it was one of the first slides.
Yeah, probably it was the food dollar chart. I can try to go back to it and see if we're talking about the same one here. That's sort of like an old-fashioned disco. When you go that fast, then it starts to boggle your mind. That one there? Is that what we're talking about? It's in hundreds of millions of dollars. So this now our food dollar budget is well beyond this now, but this was basically for the first 90 years of the 20th century. So we're measuring it there in terms of hundreds of millions of dollars. So at the beginning of the century, we were spending about billions of dollars. Excuse me. At the beginning of the century, we were spending about $70 billion on food, and 40 of that was going to farmers. By the end of the century, we were above approaching $350 billion in food expenses, and of that, farmers were getting $40 billion. So it's just kind of a huge shift in where the food dollar was going.
Getting less. Okay, and Tracy, if let us know if that answered your question. If it didn't, just resubmit it again. And another question was, Anthony, are you aware of any other studies currently being done in the Northeast? And that's from Sherry in Maine. So, and Tracy.
I am not. I am not. I had a few inquiries from people who heard about my study when the initial news release went out, and when Farmers Market Coalition was nice enough to spread the word about it, and some other folks. And I sent the protocol to a couple of different people who said they would like to do a study. One of them was in the Midwest. I want to say Wisconsin or Minnesota. I don't recall right off, but somewhere in that part of the world. I believe a land grant person, extension person, who was very interested in trying to do a similar study at markets around there. And there was another inquiry from somebody in the Northeast. But again, I'm sorry, right off the top of my head, I can't remember the state or the community. So two people among the folks who followed up with me, two were people who said they hope to do a similar kind of study. And again, I don't have it here, but the protocol I use that explains the rationale and goes through the step-by-step of gathering the data, I would be happy to share with anybody who just wants to contact me.
Yeah, I do think that more studies of this nature would be great, because I know for us it's self-reported that folks feel like the prices are comparable or less at farmers markets than at grocery stores.
Right. Which is no small thing. You mentioned that when I saw your slide, it is self-reported, so it could be critiqued. Somebody could say, well, that's just their perception. They don't know. First of all, they probably do know, but But just as importantly, it is the perception, because to be honest, there's a whole lot of people, even people of reasonably good means, who stay away from farmers markets precisely because they have the opposite perception. They think, they assume, they've heard that farmers markets are way too expensive. And so that's kind of the common mythology that a lot of people carry. Now, some of them have then tested that and gone to farmers markets and found out that they're not, or that if it is more expensive, it's worth it to them. But many people, in my own personal experience and from others, say that. That's what they've heard, that's what they believe. Just the opposite of your study in that case. So I think the perception, whether it's a perception that it's affordable or that it's expensive, is really just as important as anything, because that's what either gets people there or keeps them away.
Yeah, I agree with you. There's another question here from somebody who wanted to know, from Martha, about whether there's a better word for consumers. You know, maybe shoppers or customers when referring to folks who shop at farmers markets, or if you know a better term than consumer.
I think either of those would be better. Customers, shoppers, farmers market supporters. I mean, you can get as nuanced as you want about that. Consumer is the crude capitalist term.
Another question.
That's what we've been reduced to. But yeah, I agree. It'd be better to. Go ahead.
We're all talking about the same group, I think. Here's a question from Anna Rickards. She wants to know if there are any thoughts on how to communicate these findings or other general hidden cost information at the market when customers express concern about price. Is there like an elevator speech that we could give to consumers when they talk about the price perceptions that you just mentioned?
Well, I think up until recently, until not just my study, but these other studies that are emerging, we had a lot of other sound bites that we could use and that we did use. And I hear customers at my own booth say them all the time. They say, you know, it's so much better quality. It's so much fresher. There's varieties here I can't get anywhere else. There's a sense of community. I mean, all the things that Nikki mentioned and the things that I've had at the beginning of the presentation are the main ways that we have spoken about why farmers markets or local food more generally is worth it, whether it's the same price or more. We've, I think, had those little tidbits of the superior eating, the better health possibilities, the lack of processed foods, and the much greater proportion of fresh foods. So those are the sound bites of the tools that we have, I think, already been using to extol the virtues of farmers markets. Part of why I undertook this kind of very one-dimensional analysis was inspired by what I saw as an increasing number of stories cropping up in places like the New York Times and elsewhere that acknowledged the virtues of farmers markets, the better eating, the community and civic engagement, the freshness, the food miles, all of that, but always had this big but. Yes, that's all true, but they're way too expensive and only the well-to-do can afford them. In fact, there was an article, I want to say it was in Atlantic Monthly, but I can't remember, but that was basically the title of it, is Good Food Only for the Rich. And so I think we've had the other pieces to talk about. Now it looks like increasingly we have the hard, simple price data to use as well. Now we can say better quality, fresher food, less processed, healthier eating, better incomes for farmers, and for the most part they're quite affordable compared to mainstream grocery stores. So it gives us a whole new level of engaging this discussion. And this is why, since my study was a very limited study in one region of the country, but 6 states is still 6 states, but this is why doing this study in other places is very important. The results may not be the same in other places. It may be that in some parts of the country, farmers markets are on average more expensive, and then there has to be a different type of argument made. But certainly here, and I imagine in other parts of the country, we now have that on our side as well. And I also, let me add one other thing. As a farmer who spent most of my life trying to elevate the income of farmers and improve farming as a livelihood and a vocation. The last thing I want to come out of this is some sort of a race to the bottom on pricing. I think farmers struggle, and farmers who sell at farmers markets do fairly well, but they certainly don't make out like bandits. So I certainly hope an outcome from this is not that we're encouraging cheaper pricing from farmers at farmers markets.
I think Betsy has a great comment here that I feel the same way. She says it would be great to increase coordination among people who are doing farmers market price studies. We did our Portland study almost simultaneously with Anthony's study and are strongly considering expanding beyond Portland. So maybe this is something that the Farmers Market Coalition can help coordinate or even just warehouse all the different studies that are occurring. There's another question here from, yeah.
I was going to say just a meta study of the studies that sort of wove together from Portland to Vermont to Appalachia in the southeast, and anything else that crops up would be very interesting to put them all into one kind of meta study too.
Yeah, it certainly dispel a lot of these myths about farmers markets being more expensive. If we have solid numbers that prove it, and people are self-reporting that they feel this way as well. There's another question here from Linda. She says I may have missed this, but was your price study accompanied by a demographic study of the people currently using your farmers market?
It was not, except that I can tell you that in general, there was a bit of a correlation between the size of the city and the relative size of the city and the question of affordability. So if you wanted to make some speculation, in our area, there's certainly plenty of poor people in the mid-sized cities, but the poverty tends to be strongest in the rural areas. And in the rural areas, the small towns and the small cities, those first two categories, was where the affordability, the superior affordability of farmers markets was strongest. When I got into the small group of larger cities like Lexington, Kentucky, and Charleston, South Carolina, Richmond, Virginia, Knoxville, Tennessee, like those, at that point, farmers markets were still more affordable, but it was getting closer to a 50-50 in the affordability, sort of half the time yes, half the time slightly more expensive. So I think you could probably, if you had the demographic information, it probably would correlate with the fact that there were more affluent people at least shopping at farmers markets, not perhaps overall as a percentage of the population, but there was probably more affluent people shopping at those larger city farmers markets. And as a result, farmers were responding by charging a bit more, charging what the market could bear. It wasn't a real strong difference by any means. The basic conclusions of the study held, but there was a bit of a correlation with town size, and as I say, I think that was also a correlation with the demographics of the shoppers.
Okay. Another question from Karen here. Does Anthony feel that customers might be engaged in the data gathering or sharing at market, for instance? Like, can we engage the customers to help collect this data, or would that skew the data or open a can of worms, so to speak?
Well, I think you could engage most anybody. Actually, one of my data gatherers was a farmers market shopper who lives here in Abingdon, but has family connections, a daughter in college actually in Richmond, Virginia. So she gathered the Richmond data when she was visiting her daughter. So I think you can get anybody. I think the key, though, is very, very good training. And I will say that although I feel like I was able to account for this in the final analysis, the data gathered by the young woman I employed to go gather the data was generally better in terms of the consistency than the data gathered by the volunteers that I had. Fortunately, she gathered most of the data. So if you are going to use volunteers, whether they're a customer at a market or not, I don't think that's the issue. I think the issue is a very clear protocol, number one. What are they gathering? How are they gathering? Are they using well, I did the mathematics, so they didn't have to deal with the median price or anything, but just be very, very clear, step by step, leave nothing to chance, which I think I did. But even so, I didn't actually sit down with people and train them. I did it by phone call and email and then some follow-up, and I think that were I to do it again, I would actually have a training session. As simple as it sounds, there's things come up and people interpret things in different ways. So I would strongly recommend that. If you have a core of volunteers that are going out and gathering data, I would do that. You might also, if you do have farmers market customers, have them not collect data from their hometown market. Have them go over one neighborhood or one county, just to avoid the possibility that they might want to bias it in some way for their own market. That might be a good idea as well.
Right, so have them do different towns, or so just to have strict protocols when you're doing your study. That sounds like a great idea.
Yeah, it's critical, actually. Otherwise, you really do have to put a lot of apples and oranges and a lot of subjectivity.
We have another question here from Migdalia Loyola. How does one take into account the seasonality and or limited hours of operation of a farmer's market versus a supermarket when thinking about affordability? What implications do you think the findings of this study have for markets and for vendors?
Okay, I'm hearing that as two different questions. In terms of seasonality, I mean, you have to acknowledge up front that farmers markets are less convenient because most of them are open, for dramatically limited hours compared to a supermarket, whether it's a one day a week or twice a week or 3 times a week. It's always going to be far fewer hours. So that's something, and that's one of the reasons people don't shop at farmers markets, is because they are less convenient. So that's a given. In terms of seasonality, I did this study late in the season for us, where the summer crops were beginning to fade and the fall crops were beginning to come on. If anything, that probably helped the supermarkets in competitiveness. Supermarket prices don't change that much except for specials that they run over the course of the season because they're drawing on a global supply chain. Whereas farmers markets, if I had done this at another time of season, like say peak season for tomatoes, the tomato prices would generally have been considerably lower at farmers markets because everybody has them, and vendors tend to bring their prices down when there's a lot of the same product available. Because I did it later in the year, the fall crops were just starting, the summer crops were in their heyday or in their decline, and so actually prices were bouncing back up compared to peak season. So the seasonality is a factor, but it's something that I think, again, this study, if anything, advantaged the supermarkets in that regard. The other question in terms of how farmers and vendors can use the analysis, if I understood that correctly, I would be thrilled if farmers market managers and leaders of farmers markets would allude to the study, particularly if they're anywhere in the Appalachia or the Southeast, but even if not, just taking a little quote from it, and again, I'd be happy to send the full study to anybody who wants it, as part of their promotions. Again, farmers markets are great at promoting the many other qualities and characteristics of farmers markets. Now they can draw from this study or others to say, according to a recent study, farmers markets are typically more affordable than supermarkets. So I think market promotion, encouraging that group of people that right now thinks farmers markets are too expensive to think again, to give it a try, that's how I think people promoting farmers markets can use it. And I'd say vendors at the market could do the same thing.
I think it's a great idea. There's a few questions here asking if you've used the data yet. I know it's a recent study, but have you used it to promote your farmers markets? And are there examples of how to effectively use this data in any farmers markets marketing or advertising? I think it would be great for, say, press releases. If you're sending out a press release about your farmers markets to the media, to just tuck in some of the data in there. But if you have other examples.
In fact, yes, the answer is no, we have not, because by the time I had analyzed all the data and put it together, it was getting on towards Thanksgiving, and most markets were either closed or sort of very infrequent at that point. But I know that every farmers market where the data was gathered, the market managers or market leaders are very interested in the results and using them. Certainly in my hometown market of Abingdon, I'm on the steering committee, and we have every intention of using the results in our promotional and educational materials for the upcoming season. So I think certainly for the markets where it was tested, I can give them their own results. I can break it out for the individual market and say how they did on affordability, as well as put it in the larger context of the full range of markets. And I'm confident that many of them will use it in that way.
We have one last question here. If folks have any other questions, please send them along, and we'll be sure to put all the questions and answers up on the Farmers Market Coalition website. This question was a question about whether you took the average of like products from the different vendors at the farmers markets when you used it to compare against grocery store prices. Like
I didn't use the average. I used the median. So again, the difference is the average takes all, let's say you have 5 items, you add up all 5, you get a total, and you divide it by 5. That's the average or the mean. I use the median, which means you literally list the prices out side by side, and you pick the midpoint. And the median is generally considered a more reliable representation of the average price than the mean is. And so I use the median. It's just different in kind of mathematics and statistics, but it's generally considered more reliable for a small sample, so that's what I did. In the supermarkets, I did the same thing for the meat items because there was like multiple varieties of breakfast sausage, for instance. So I didn't necessarily take every one, but I took the range of prices from the house brand to the more expensive brand, and then picked the median. For produce in the supermarkets, there's typically just one price. There's a price on carrots, there's a price on cucumbers, and that's it. So there's the price maybe on organic, but otherwise it's just a single price. So you didn't have to do a median or an averaging type calculation for the produce, but I did for the meats.
Okay, great. I hope that answers Lindsay's question. And that concludes our webinar for now. Thanks so much, Anthony, for your time, and to the Farmers Market Coalition for hosting this for us. We hope you guys learned a lot of things at our presentation, and that folks continue to do their own studies on price comparisons. I know that Farmers Market Coalition had polled a bunch of the folks on the webinar right now, and a lot of folks have done their own studies, kind of like the one in Portland. So it would be great to kind of hear from more people about the results. So thanks, everyone.
And Nick, if I could just say one last thing. The other place I would encourage people to use the results of their own study, and I would be thrilled if they'd use the results of this study, is with their local, state, and federal representatives. Again, while there's plenty of people in public office who are supporting local food, I'd say it's a larger group that are skeptics at best, and even some people who are making a concerted effort to change, federal policy and other things, removing support for local food systems and farmers markets, et cetera. We're all aware of that. We're all aware of the farm bills coming up. These kinds of things really, I think, help make a convincing case with legislators who are less inclined to be swayed by the touchy-feely qualities or the aesthetic qualities of markets. They want to know the hard data. So strongly encourage people to use this kind of information with their elected officials as well.
That's a really great point, Anthony, because I feel like there are audiences that respond, like you said, better to the hard facts.
Right.
Great. Thank you so much, both of you, Anthony and Nikki. These were wonderful presentations, and thank you so much to all of our members who joined us today. I hope you all have a really wonderful afternoon, and I will be sure to get all of the questions that are answered and unanswered out in an email, along with several links to resources. So thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you, Liz.